Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another discussion in the context of the Athens Democracy Forum. And today we're going to be talking about online search and responsible innovation. I couldn't be more thrilled and honored to welcome Kent Walker, Senior Vice President for Global Affairs at Google. Kent, very happy to have you on board.
Join, Nico. Thanks for the opportunity.
So Kent oversees the teams responsible for legal matters, government affairs, content policy, and philanthropy, and for nearly 30 years has focused on the intersection of technology, law, and policy. And I also hear from his team that he's an avid fan of history. So I think we're going to be having an excellent conversation today. Really looking forward to it.
The back and forth of our current crises against the longer warped and woofed history, it's fascinating. But we continue to be optimistic about the direction of travel and would love to talk about some of the issues we're seeing.
And just to preface this, it's really interesting that I'm currently in Lesbos, in the island of Mytilene. You yourself are in California, but together we're in the Athens Democracy Forum. I think this is already sort of an indication of what a transformational year it has been and how online and offline worlds are merging. And I think in that context, we're going to have a lot of interesting things to talk about how fast the world was already changing, but is changing even in a more accelerated pace this year.
Yeah, how quickly it's changing and how interdependent we are in so many ways. Trade, not only goods and services and trade, but ideas and technology tools as we deal with a global pandemic. I think those kinds of interconnections have never been more important.
Absolutely. So let's take it a step back to begin this conversation. So the theme of this year's Athens Democracy Forum is the new abnormal. And I can't think of something that was more abnormal this year than the marketplace of ideas and the information game. So COVID-19 caused a number of challenges when it came to information, from the fact that scientific knowledge was evolving all the time to a rise in conspiracies and misinformation. Given the fact that Google's mission is to organize the world's information and to make it universally accessible and useful, what were the challenges that were caused by the pandemic, and how did Google tackle them?
I think we started out with the same challenges that you and many of our listeners started out with, that we were shifting our entire teams to work from home. We wanted people to be safe and we wanted to be socially responsible. But at the same time, we recognized that our platform gave us the opportunity to do some good in the world and an obligation to make sure that conspiracy theories weren't spreading and the like. So one of the first things we did was to go out and ask our employees, Googlers, for their ideas about how we could contribute. We got more than 100 ideas back. Things like ways of using artificial intelligence to identify bad content online and to promote authoritative content, which is the flip side of the coin. We rely on the World Health Organization and national public health authorities for their guidance as to what's appropriate and not. But beyond just the content side of things, as a company, we wanted to pitch in. We contributed more than $250 million in ad grants to the WHO and to national governments. $150 million in Europe has gone to both public health authorities and to European-based nonprofits who are dealing with fallout from the pandemic. And then on the technology side, we pursued, for us, a very unusual partnership with Apple, one of our key competitors, to come up with a privacy protective exposure notification tool that's already being adopted throughout Europe and increasingly around the world. So things like this, community mobility reports for public health authorities, which can help them understand what measures are working and what aren't, support for small and medium businesses, et cetera. It's really been an all hands on deck effort, but we hope we are making a contribution.
One of the things that, one of the cliches of the year, I guess, was the word unprecedented. We kept talking about how this is an unprecedented crisis, a unique pandemic. But I think one of the benefits of the Athens Democracy Forum is that it puts contemporary problems into a little bit of a perspective. And it often makes us realize that modern day problems are reincarnations of old ones. So in that context, were there any previous phenomena that were similar to the pandemic in terms of how it affected the information that's out there? And to put it more bluntly, where did Google get its inspiration for the policy responses to the challenges in information caused by COVID-19?
You're right to say that this is an unprecedented circumstance. Although, in a sense, every day is new. We forget that on Google, for example, at least 17% of the queries we get every day we have never seen before. Humans are endlessly inventive, and the news is constantly changing, and people are always looking for new areas of knowledge to explore. And then we've seen this in response to explosion of content that's online. There's more information been stored in the last 20 years than in all of human history combined. So this incredible demand, this incredible supply coming together, that's created new opportunities, more ability for people to learn, and I'm sure we'll talk more about new forms of employment and connectivity, but also new challenges. But the larger historical example is exactly right, because every time there's a new form of communication technology, society responds in important ways. And that you can go back to Gutenberg and the printing press setting off challenges to governments and religions across Europe, the rise of the post office in the 1930s and the 1830s and 1840s in Europe, then gave rise to the revolutions of 1848 as people across the continent were able to talk to each other and exchange then radical ideas. Radio and the rise of demagogues, television with narrowcasting and kind of the first filter bubbles. So each time the new technologies come along, I think it calls on us to develop new social norms, new rules of the road. How do you balance these new capabilities, but at the same time innovate in responsible ways?
Definitely. And you sort of touched upon on the next theme that I want to talk about, which is the idea of the online and the offline worlds merging. We've always had change, but it goes through different paces, and sometimes it's more accelerated. And as is true with every crisis, the pandemic was also an accelerator of change. It caused a digital transformation in multiple countries across the globe, including Greece itself. So as the online and offline worlds are merging, as we're moving, even with a more accelerated pace in this fourth industrial revolution, how is Google's role and mission evolving? How is it catching up with this accelerated change caused by this year that we are experiencing?
Yeah, I should start by saying it has been great to see the Greek government's new digital governance bill and real commitments to being what they call a cloud first country, with more digitization and finding ways that can lift up citizens across the board, giving people new access to opportunities and to learn new things, to grow, to find new employment. Uh, our contribution is trying to build on our experience, our expertise where we have it in data storage and management, and using some of the tools I talked about, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the like, to not only help consumers find more useful information, get them the things that they want to get done, help them get things done, but also expanding our cloud efforts to help with businesses out there who are struggling to recover from the pandemic. I know in the United States, we've seen something like 1 in 6 businesses have gone out of business as a result of the pandemic. How do we build back better? How do we help them get back to work? How do we help new people who are trying to start businesses move forward? So that's things like making our Meet tool for video conferencing, or tools or credits or grants available, but also working with our partners and listening to governments to find out what people need, because every country is going to be different on this.
You mentioned two things that I sort of want to touch upon, or the intersection of these two things. So on the topic of machine learning and artificial intelligence, and also the role of governments, following up on the accelerated pace, I think what we've seen in the past couple of years is that technological change is faster than governments can cope with or can understand, and they sort of retroactively legislate or implement policies. How did you see this phenomenon coming to fruition this year with the pandemic? And where do you see this going in the future? Is it really a problem that we're just innovating so fast that governments can't really catch up with the pace of technological innovation?
Well, I think it's always been the case that the private sector is flexible and traditionally moves quickly. And that's important with something like the pandemic. You've seen big pharmaceutical companies really pivot quickly to put their resources against the notion of developing a vaccine and figuring out how to distribute it. So I think there's a lot of energy there that you want to be able to harness to lift up society generally. And more generally, we are at the same time seeing that governments, while they want to have checks and balances and good democratic processes, because the decisions they're making are important ones, they're also seeing the advantages of digitization and recognizing that no one wants to be left behind in that. The goal is to lift up all citizens, including disadvantaged citizens or citizens who've been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. A number of women who have been forced to who have lost jobs or been in situations where it's harder for them to stay engaged in the economy. How do we use the tools we have and put them at the service of government to be able to do things like move onto the cloud, make government services available to people generally? And we're seeing incredible interest there. One of the fastest growing parts of our business is the public sector business. And new people coming into government are accustomed to tools that they've used in schools or the private sector. They're a driver for change. I think they're helping government become more nimble and think things through. There's always going to be a balance, of course, because you want government to regulate responsibly. There's a desire to future-proof sometimes, and the risk of that is that you cut off innovation and actually keep some of the social improvement from happening, but you don't want to lag behind either. So different governments are coming at it in different ways, but generally speaking, I think you are seeing a real focus on this.
No, absolutely, I agree. And then another question related to governments is the fact that one of the biggest impacts of the pandemic, beyond the health crisis, was the economic downturn. And now we've seen national economies facing a significant downturn. We have yet to see its depth. But at the same time, a number of tech companies have withstood the crisis, and they often saw their profits soar as we're moving to this digitization that you're talking about. So as we're now shifting our conversation to strategies for economic recovery, how do you see Google fitting into this global effort to sort of reshape the economy of the future? What do you think its responsibility is?
Sure, I think we have a real responsibility, even as our business has been challenged in a lot of ways. Obviously, we make the primary source that funds all of our different tools and services has been advertising, and advertising has dropped off significantly during the pandemic, especially in sectors like travel and entertainment, but also retail as a whole. Still, as the economy comes back, we think digital ads can actually be an important part of letting businesses scale back up, reach new audiences. And so we want to be part of the solution on that and are working with our partners. So let me give you a few examples of the kinds of things that we've been working on. Today, as part of our effort to support Greece's efforts, we are announcing that Google.org is committing $1 million in funding to Greece, focused on economic recovery, distance learning, and digital skills for citizens. That's, of course, just one element. More broadly, digital's an enabler for personal development and work opportunities across the board. With the pandemic, we've seen highlighted the critical role that technology plays in our daily lives. Some parts of the economy have been able to continue precisely because of remote work and online shopping, home entertainment, telemedicine, all of these new trends, which have accelerated quickly. Some have said that we've seen more change in 5 months than we had seen in 5 years before. So that accelerates one of the big trends of our generation. That's the new access to information. It's important to step back sometimes and think about it from a global perspective. More than half of the world's population has access to an internet connection. That's arguably more people than have access to decent sanitation. The internet is what gives a farmer in the mountains of Crete the same kinds of access to information as a fund manager in Athens has, or for that matter, a pupil in India, the same access to information as a professor in Oxford has. So that's a remarkable state of affairs. It's never been true before. And we are seeing this new normal of remote work and online meetings that have become the norm for some. We're seeing the peak usage of our video conference platform, for example, Meet, grow by 30 times. We're now hosting 3 billion minutes of video meetings every day, and that's just one company. We're seeing new trends in online learning, huge spikes in interest in free digital skills training all around the world, 2 and 3 times increases in countries that are sheltering in place. So but that's the good news. We also see dramatic challenges. McKinsey did a report in the last couple of months that suggests 60 million jobs are at risk just in Europe alone. So I think we all have to be committed to help with something of that scale. We've got a few examples from just in Greece that we launched a few years ago, a digital skills education program, working together with the Ministry of Tourism. Since that time, we trained 140,000 people to grow their businesses and careers in tourism. Many of those people felt that the training really mattered to them. It helped them grow their businesses. It helped them find a new job or helped them grow in their career. Just in the last couple of months, we launched Grow Greece with Google. And that's a program that helps economic recovery by giving free training and tools to support small and medium enterprises and employees. We have a job search tool, which helps job seekers by bringing together job postings from around the web. And we're now working with the Greek government on an internships program, which gives free digital skills training to 3,000 unemployed people. And then the government connects them with SMEs for paid internships. And that model has actually been a real success for us every time we've worked with it. If you can give the training combined with the promise of an internship or job at the back end, then people both learn and they're motivated to learn. And they really have turned things around.
Yes, and the efforts have not gone unnoticed. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen Google be in the public eye so much in Greece. I mean, this year it was really noticeable, and I think Google also started to enter the general conversation about how technology helps us sort of reshape the future. It's been a tough decade for the country, and before the pandemic, there were high hopes that there was going to be sort of an exit strategy from that, and we're still hopeful. Um, but to sort of follow up on some of the programs like Grow Greece with Google, and when it comes to the digital skill set, um, you know, automation really is replacing jobs. New jobs are being created, and there is a need for a skills transfer. What are some of the challenges in that process from Google's experience in countries like Greece? Um, what are some of the challenges of trying to approach people digitally to transfer a digital skill set, and what is the role of governments themselves working in tandem with companies that out of their goodwill, of course, want to train the workforce?
Sure. Look, I think jobs matter everywhere. Jobs matter to governments. Jobs matter to the economy. Jobs are what give people a sense of purpose and meaning in their life, as well as providing a source of income and giving people what they need to survive. So it's important not just that we have robust economies, but that we have equitable economies with people having the opportunity to contribute in the right ways. People in very different places when it comes to the digital economy, because some of the digital skilling, the digital opportunities have come on so quickly in the last couple of decades. There are people who are at a lower level of digital skills, but we found that if you can give people relatively basic tools, that they can learn in months rather than years, they can be really productive, contributing workers, feeling great about themselves. We pioneered something called our IT certificates in the United States, and then maybe ultimately around the world, where you can qualify to be an IT support professional, get a certificate, and then you can ultimately use that in lieu of a college degree to get a job, whether with an NGO we can partner or with companies down the line. And that combination of being able to say, again, it's not just the training, and training can range from being, a few hours to help a business figure out how to get its website up online so it can reach audiences around the world, to this very, month-long or multi-month-long program where you actually get a lot of deep skills. That range of things is important. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. We have to be very smart and savvy about how we reach people where they are. And at the same time, I've been talking about digital skilling in the sense of education, the economy. There's also an important part when it comes to distance learning. You're seeing education systems around the world attempting to shift to more distance learning, sometimes because they have to, sometimes because there are advantages. But kids who are on the wrong side of the digital divide could really fall behind here. So we're supporting groups like in Greece, there's SOS Children's Villages or the Melissa Network that are helping underserved children who can pursue schooling without having that disrupted by the pandemic.
Since you touched upon remote working, distance learning, generationally speaking, sort of as a representative of a younger generation, it's been quite a journey this year in terms of how we tend to look at these things. Because I think at the beginning there was a lot of excitement. I think the younger generation, especially, was really willing to embrace things happening more digitally. We don't necessarily have to commute to work every day. But as things have moved on, in general, the pandemic has caused that. There's also been a little bit of a fatigue about the fact that things happen digitally exclusively. So, what do you think? Where do you think the balance is sort of going to end? So, there's definitely excitement. There's definitely fatigue at the same time. What do you foresee the trend to be? Did we really sort of move a little bit too fast in the direction of distance learning and remote working, or do you think the fatigue is more related to the pandemic itself?
I think it's a little bit of both. It was funny. Just this morning, I saw a piece of spam in my inbox with the headline was "Work from home!" exclamation point. Which a year ago might have been an exciting opportunity for somebody, and now it says work from home is the last thing I want to do. I want to get back with people and engage. But we've actually surveyed people at Google to understand what their preferences are. And in many cases, people have long commutes that they no longer have to do in both directions. They're able to spend more time with family in different ways. But there are challenges with work-life balance and making sure that we are respectful of the different needs that people have and the different circumstances they may be in. I don't think we will go back to where we were. That the indication we've gotten is a number of our employees would like to work from home, a day or two a week, but they also value the notion of being in the office, to be able to see people, to have that sort of creative spark that you get when you bump into somebody getting a coffee, or just the human relationship that's so important, rather than just talking to people over screens all day long. So I think we were going to see new ways of working. I think in education, they talked about the flipped classroom, where you did your homework in school, where you had somebody to help you with the problems, and you watched the lectures at home over video when it was just broadcasting out to you. You can imagine, in the same way, a flipped office, where you take care of your email at home when you don't need other people, but you come in for events to connect with people in your team. I also think the technology tools are evolving quickly. I'm looking at Google Meet, and we've rolled out a dozen different enhancements over the course of the last 6 months. That's a lot faster than the normal course of innovation, even for us, and we pride ourselves in evolving our tools pretty quickly. So I think it'll be very interesting to see, but the one thing I'm confident in is that it'll be a different world we'll come back to than the one we left.
Definitely. Since you mentioned surveys, one of my favorite things that Google does is the trends that sort of represent the Google trends represent sometimes very interesting insights that you wouldn't expect when it comes to what people search. So I can imagine a lot of expected trends that came up this year because of the pandemic. Certainly, a lot of interest in COVID-19, the measures, etc. What were some of the unusual trends, if you're familiar with any that came up in 2020?
Yeah, I'm not as deep on that as I should be. I think it's one of these fascinating things where you see the long-term evolution. We have something called Ngrams, which looks at book searches and the different uses of words over time, and those shift. The trends tend to, depending on how you cut them, still, I think it's human nature. You see celebrities or what's in the news immediately or what's in the news in your country. You saw different spikes during the pandemic about do masks work or not, or when will a vaccine be ready, or what shutdowns are coming to our community. But I'm not sure of those what would break out and be dramatically surprising to people.
Unusual, yeah, for sure. No, let's move to a different topic that we sort of touched upon before when talking about commuting and sort of some of the benefits of remote working. Kent, I think there are two things that are really certain about the future. One is that technology is becoming more and more embedded in our lives. And the second is that unfortunately our planet is getting dangerously warmer and is sort of walking towards its destruction. Um, it's sort of becoming clear that the two must have some sort of symbiosis. So I'm wondering, how do we shape an eco-friendly technological future? And specifically, what's Google's responsibility towards climate change?
Yes, I think we all have a huge responsibility. Since our beginnings as a company in California, we've been focused on the risks of climate change and how we could operate as sustainably as possible. So we internally talk about 3 decades of progress. So by 2007, we were among the first major companies to be net carbon neutral with offsets, offsetting our carbon footprint. We recently announced that in 2020, we are meeting our what I think is an industry leading commitment to offset our entire carbon legacy back to the earliest days of the company. And we've announced a fairly audacious goal that we are, by 2030, going to be using carbon-free energy for all of our operations. So, we are trying to go beyond these high-level goals to actually do tactical things that create facts on the ground. We are the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy in the entire world. We have done just in the last couple of months, the largest green bond deal ever to support investments in renewable energy facilities. I believe we're the only company of our size to have matched 100% of our annual electricity consumption with renewable energy, and for the last 3 years in a row. So, we're hoping that more governments and companies adopt these kinds of goals. But also, I think it's important to say, we're fundamentally a science and technology company. Half of our employees are engineers. And our largest contributions may actually be in progressing work on artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing, and these other advanced technologies that could fundamentally transform energy efficiency, help us develop new alternative energy sources. A couple of years ago, we started using AI to analyze the energy that powers the data centers that helps you do your Google searches at home. And we already had very sustainable data centers, but by using artificial intelligence, we were able to reduce the amount of energy by a third. So those kinds of improvements, I think, will be very important, not just for us, but for other big companies and people around the world.
So following that, from organizing our information to managing our data to potentially helping, cut down on energy, technology companies have really become key players in the way we live our lives. And in a way, Google is grappling with a lot of challenges that democracies have grappled with for ages. Questions like how do we balance privacy and security? What are the rules of the marketplace of ideas in its digital form? So it's kind of an abstract question, so feel free to take it anywhere. But what is Google's role in democracy today?
Look, I think you've hit on a key theme here, which is that there's always been this dance of technology and democracy. Technology is the engine of progress. It raises living standards around the world. It's been incredible over the last 30 years. More than 1 billion people have come out of extreme poverty. And that's unprecedented in human history. And that's in part because the technology has spread so broadly so that people throughout developing countries now have access to cell phones, to other ways of getting information. So, a farmer in India can learn whether it's going to rain in the next week, so whether he or she should plant their crops, or a fisherman in Africa can understand where best to sell their catch. Those are life sort of changing sorts of things. But also, it's if you have a sick child and there's no doctor within 50 miles, can you find information, get information from the internet that will help your child be healthier and live a better life? But even while we recognize that the power of technology, that if technology is the engine, then democracy is the rudder of progress. We have to work with democratic governments on the best approaches here to make sure that there is social trust, social buy-in, understanding and acceptance of these new trends, governance and checks and balances that are appropriate. So we're very committed to that. You're right in your question. You talk about the trade-offs, the balances. There are very few of these questions that have just a single answer or just one side to the question. Every day when we're looking at questions of do you remove content from YouTube, or how do you prioritize content in search, or even how do you build an algorithm that's fair and balanced? We have a responsible innovation team that is just focused on the idea of making sure that new technologies are safe, that they have humans in the loop, that they are explainable, that there's accountability, and that there's fairness, that they operate across all people in society in a responsible way. But how do you simultaneously promote free speech and access to information, giving everyone a printing press, but at the same time, having a sense of social responsibility and saying certain content, terrorist content, say, etc., is over the line. But then, how do you draw that line? How do you promote this new energy around innovation? But also remember, you need to have equity. The Many of these questions have deep trade-offs that we're working through. We're talking with governments about in Europe and around the world. The AI technologies I talked about a few minutes ago have incredible potential, but as they get more effective, they get more complicated, more sophisticated, harder to understand. In the same way that when I grew up, I could look at my car and with a screwdriver adjust the carburetor. Now it's a bunch of computer chips under the hood, and I wouldn't know where to start. But the car operates better and doesn't break down as much. How do we deal with that when it comes to information and strike a thoughtful balance? That will be the key to developing social trust for that process and ultimately letting technology flourish in a way that helps everybody.
You're right. And then another issue, I guess, is relativism in the sense that AI ethics would that question would be answered differently in the US, differently in Europe, differently in China. Some of the questions we mentioned before, the balances of privacy and security, countries will come up with different responses to that. And sometimes that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of good to be testing different responses in different parts of the world so that you can, see the different outcomes. But following that, how does Google as a company sort of respond to this challenge? You have there's a different kind of discourse happening in Europe, say, the different kind of discourse happening in the US. How does Google navigate that? Does it want to come up with one singular response, or does it adapt sort of these dilemmas and these questions in local contexts?
Yes, it is challenging because we have to be both global and local. We have services that are available in more than 190 countries around the world. And as you say, that the variance can be valuable in some ways. In the United States, we talk about our individual states as laboratories of democracy that can pursue different experiments and see what works and what doesn't work. But it's challenging at the same time. We have a commitment across the company to access to information, making information universally accessible. That conflicts with some countries' desire to limit the information that their citizens can access. Famously, we were ultimately pulled our search engine outside of mainland China when we could not comply with some of the censorship rules that they wanted to impose. And we have versions of those conversations in many countries around the world because, as you say, each country has its own unique cultural sensitivities, their unique histories. We want to be a voice for encouraging the positive and useful use of information, upholding human rights around the world, and working on frameworks with other companies, and with countries that are like-minded to progress individual freedoms and liberties, and simultaneously make sure that we can offer as much value as we can to everyone in the world. It's very challenging, but it's a really important conversation.
Definitely. And there's another thing you mentioned that I sort of want to touch upon to sort of conclude our conversation. Incrementally, things have been improving over the past few years, but there's generally a level of pessimism in society for some reason. And definitely 2020, for obvious reasons, has been a rather pessimistic year. So, Kent, on a personal note, what makes you optimistic about the future?
Well, I mean, you're right to say, of course, that 2020 has been extraordinary from the pandemic to the political division we're seeing around the world. To here in California, we're seeing the signs of climate change with the fires that have broken out. There are any number of challenges, but as you said at the beginning, Nico, I am a student of history. My bookshelf behind me is full of books about the cycles of turmoil and progress that we've experienced over the generations. And in the spirit of the Athens Forum, it is important to look back at the long sweep of progress ever since the Industrial Revolution. That curve is up and to the right. Sometimes there are hiccups, but we live today better than ever. We live today better than the King of France did in 1700, with better healthcare, better food, better access to information and entertainment. It's an extraordinary story of progress. And that's just in the developing world. I talked before about the more than 1 billion people who have come from extreme deprivation into having enough to eat and clothe and shelter their family, with health care, et cetera. I think we can be proud of what we collectively have accomplished. And based on that, I am optimistic that working together with companies, NGOs, governments, we can and we will continue that progress.
Thank you so much, Kent. And indeed, I think these we started by saying that there's nothing really unprecedented, but everything is unprecedented at the same time. There is no doubt that things are moving really fast, and there's a lot of innovation, and there's no doubt that this innovation needs to be responsible. I'm really happy you shared a lot of ways that Google makes sure that innovation certainly is responsible and is helping lead us towards a more sustainable future, a healthier future, a more democratic future.
Thanks so much for your thoughtful questions. I thought it was a great conversation.
And thanks everyone for logging into this discussion, online search and responsible information. Hope you enjoy the rest of the discussions in the context of the Athens Democracy Forum.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.